Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in the massive chamber of the Galactic Concord and watched as thousands of alien representatives talked and laughed and made deals that would never include humanity. She had been coming to this place for 30 years now, and every single time she came with hope in her heart. And every single time she left with that hope crushed into dust. The year was 2347. And humanity had been part of the Galactic Concord for exactly 200 years. 2 centuries of trying to prove themselves worthy of respect, 2 centuries of being ignored, mocked, and treated like children who had somehow wandered into a room full of adults. The Great Hall stretched before her like an endless ocean of alien bodies and strange sounds and colors that human eyes could barely process. 4,000 species filled this chamber, and among them, humanity was considered nothing more than a minor curiosity, a young species with only 14 colony worlds and no real power to speak of. Elena looked down at the document in her hands. The same document she had presented 86 times before, asking for the simple right to expand human territory into unclaimed space. She already knew what the answer would be. The petition from the human delegation is denied, announced the speaker, a towering crystalline being whose voice rang through the chamber like breaking glass. The Concord does not recognize the need for human expansion at this time. Laughter rippled through certain sections of the chamber. Elena did not react because she had learned long ago that showing emotion only made things worse. She simply nodded and gathered her things and prepared to leave, just as she always did. But today, something was different today. High-Brood Lord Xyrix of the Veluxi Dominion rose from his seat and demanded the attention of the entire chamber. Veluxi were an ancient and terrible species, insectoid creatures with black shells and eyes that held no warmth and hearts that knew nothing of mercy. They had been raiding human colonies for 50 years now, taking prisoners by the thousands and working them to death in their labor camps, and the Concord did nothing because the Veluxi were powerful and humans were not. I wish to address the chamber regarding the human question, Xyrix said, his mandibles clicking with what might have been amusement. These soft creatures come to us year after year, begging for scraps from our table like starving animals. More laughter filled the chamber. Elena's hands tightened on her documents, but her face remained calm. Perhaps, Xyrix continued, we should simply accept what the humans truly are, the galaxy's doormat species, existing only to be stepped upon by their betters. The laughter grew louder now, coming from dozens of species who had never once defended humanity against any injustice. Elena stood slowly and faced the chamber. With quiet dignity, the human delegation thanks the Concord for its consideration, she said in a voice that betrayed nothing of the fire burning inside her. We will return again next year. She walked out of the chamber with her head held high, ignoring the sounds of mockery that followed her. But once she reached her private quarters, her mask finally cracked. She thought about the reports that had crossed her desk, the morning reports from Captain Marcus Chen of the HSS Endurance, who had discovered something horrible in the outer reach territories of Veluxi labor camp. Hidden away on a dead moon where no one would ever look, 12,000 human beings had died there, worked until their bodies gave out, and then thrown into mass graves like garbage men and women and children, taken from their homes and treated worse than animals, until death finally released them from their suffering. And when Captain Chun had asked Earth Command what he should do, they had told him to observe and report only, because starting a war with the Veluxi would mean the end of everything humanity had built, because the Concord would never support them, because they were alone in a galaxy that did not care if they lived or died. Elena sat at her desk and stared at the wall. For a long time she thought about her grandmother, who had been one of the first human diplomats to the Concord. Full of hope and wonder at joining a galactic community, she thought about her father, who had spent his entire life trying to make that dream real. Only to die disappointed, she thought about all the humans who had believed that if they were just patient enough, just kind enough, just civilized enough, the galaxy would eventually accept them too. 100 years of patience, 200 years of turning the other cheek, 200 years of believing that the universe rewarded those who chose peace over war, and what had it gotten them? 12,000 bodies in a mass grave, and a galaxy that laughed while their children were worked to death. Elena opened her secure communication terminal and began typing a message to Earth, a message that would be encrypted with the highest security protocols humanity possessed. The message was short, only 12 words, but those 12 words would change the course of galactic history forever. They will never stop. Recommend Prometheus. She sent the message and then sat back in her chair and felt something strange settle over her. It was not anger. Though anger was certainly there, it was not sadness. Though sadness filled her heart, it was something else. Something that felt almost like relief. For 200 years, humanity had tried to be the species they wished they could be, peaceful and patient and forgiving. But some lessons could only be learned through pain. And the galaxy had been teaching humanity a very painful lesson indeed. The lesson was simple. Kindness without strength was just weakness by another name, and weakness in this galaxy meant death. Elena did not know exactly what Prometheus was, but she knew it had been humanity's deepest secret for over a century. A contingency plan created by leaders who had seen the truth long before anyone else. She knew that once that plan was set in motion, nothing would ever be the same again. She looked out her window at the stars, those cold and distant lights that had once filled her with wonder. Now they only filled her with a terrible certainty. The galaxy had spent 200 years teaching humanity that patience was foolish and mercy was weakness, and kindness was something to be exploited very soon. Humanity would show the galaxy exactly what it had created, and Elena knew, with a certainty that went deeper than her bones, that no species would ever forget what was coming next. She smiled. And it was not a kind smile, it was the smile of someone who had finally stopped hoping for the best and started preparing for the worst. The smile of a species that had reached the absolute limit of its patience and found nothing but fire waiting on the other side. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Vasquez sent her message to Earth, and in that time, nothing seemed to change. The galaxy continued spinning as it always had, full of species who did not care about humanity and never would. But change was coming, even if no one could see it yet. On the human colony world of New Helsinki, 4 million people lived their lives in peace and hope, building farms and cities and futures for their children. They had no idea that their world had been chosen as in days. Example High Brood Lord Xyrix had decided that it was time to teach humanity a final lesson, a lesson that would break their spirit forever and show the entire galaxy what happened to species who did not know their place. The Veluxy invasion fleet arrived without warning on a bright summer morning. 3,000 warships filled the sky like a swarm of hungry locusts, blocking out the sun and casting shadows across the terrified cities below. And Xyrix made sure that every moment of what followed was broadcast live across the galactic network. He wanted the universe to watch. Commander Yuki Tanaka was stationed at the New Helsinki defense base when the invasion began, and she knew immediately that there was no hope of victory. The human garrison numbered only 20,000 soldiers with a handful of outdated ships. Against them stood an army of millions, but Yuki did not think about victory. As she rallied her troops and prepared for battle, she thought only about buying time for the civilian transports. to load time for the evacuation ships too. Launch time for as many innocent people to escape as possible. We hold the capital, she told her soldiers as explosions rocked the ground beneath their feet. Every minute we give them is another transport that gets away. Every minute we stand is another 1,000 lives saved. Her soldiers did not question her orders. They simply picked up their weapons and prepared to die for their people. The Battle of New Helsinki became something the galaxy had never seen before. 20,000 humans against millions of Veluxi warriors, fighting through burning streets and crumbling buildings, refusing to surrender no matter how hopeless things became across the galactic network. Billions of aliens watched with casual interest as the humans were pushed back block by block and building by building. Some species even placed bets on how long the humans would last before they broke and begged for mercy. But the humans did not break day after day. Week after week, they fought with a desperate fury that shocked and confused the Veluxi commanders. They fought when they ran out of ammunition and had to use knives and rocks and bare hands. They fought when their friends died beside them and their hope faded to nothing. They fought because they were human, and humans had never learned how to give up. 3 weeks passed before the Veluxi finally pushed through the last defensive line and reached the Capitol building 3 weeks in, which over 1 million civilians had escaped to safety. 3 weeks in which the human defenders had killed 10 Veluxi soldiers, for every one of their own who fell high. Broodlord Xyrix landed his personal shuttle in front of the burning Capitol building, surrounded by 40,000 of his finest warriors. He had come to accept humanity's surrender personally, to savor this moment of triumph that would be remembered for centuries. But when the doors of the Capitol building opened, there was no army waiting to surrender. There was only Commander Yuki Tanaka, standing alone amid the smoke and flames, her uniform torn and bloody, but her spine as straight as a steel beam. Behind her, hidden in the basement of the building, was a fusion reactor that her engineers had spent 3 weeks converting into the largest bomb in human history. I expected your leaders, Xyrix said, his mandibles clicking with amusement. Not a single broken female. Where's your surrender? Yuki looked at the alien monster before her and felt no fear at all. Before I answer, she said calmly, I want you to know that my people tried. We tried for 200 years. To live in peace with this galaxy, we asked for understanding and received mockery. We begged for justice and received only cruelty. We pleaded for mercy, not for ourselves, but for the idea that civilization meant something real. Her hand moved to a device hidden in her belt. You taught us that it means nothing, she continued, her voice now being broadcast across every channel in the galaxy. You taught us that kindness is weakness and patience is foolishness and mercy is something to be exploited. So here is our answer to your request for surrender. Xyrix finally sensed that something was wrong, but it was far too late. Humanity does not surrender, Yuki said with a smile. Humanity remembers and humanity repays. She pressed the button. Explosion turned night into day across half the planet. Yuki Tanaka was gone in an instant, along with Xyrix and 40,000 Veluxi warriors, erased from existence by the fury of a star compressed into a single terrible moment. Blast was visible from orbit. The shockwave flattened everything within 50 kilometers, and across the galaxy, billions of watching aliens sat in stunned silence as they realized what they had just witnessed. A single human woman had chosen death over submission and had taken one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy with her. The broadcast ended, but its impact was only beginning on Earth. The United Human Parliament convened an emergency session. The very hour representatives from every human world gathered in the Great Hall, their faces grim and their hearts burning with a rage that had been building for 2 centuries. President Amara Akonko stood before them, and asked a simple question. For 200 years, we have chosen peace for 200 years. We have believed that patience would be rewarded. Commander Tanaka and 4 million of our people have shown us the truth. The question before this body is simple. What do we do now? The vote that followed was the first unanimous decision in the Parliament's entire history. Every single representative, from Earth to the farthest colony, voted the same way: war, not war, as the galaxy understood. It not war for territory or resources or power war, for survival war. For dignity war, to teach the universe that humanity was not a doormat to be stepped upon. President Okonkwo addressed humanity that night in a broadcast that reached every human ear in existence. For 2 centuries, she said, her voice hard as iron and cold as space. We showed the galaxy who we wished to be. We showed them our kindness, our patience, our hope for a better universe. They answered with slavery and murder and laughter. Behind her, on screens across the planet, ships began rising from hidden bases on the dark side of the moonships that no alien had ever seen. Ships that humanity had built in secret for over 100 years. Now, President Okonkwo continued as thousands of warships filled the sky. We will show them who we were forced to become. The sleeping giant had finally opened its eyes, and the galaxy was about to learn why humanity had hidden its true strength for so long, not because they were weak, but because they had known, always known, that when they finally unleashed their full fury, nothing would ever be able to stop them. In the weeks that followed the destruction of High Broodlord Xyrix, the galaxy waited for humanity to do something predictable. They waited for angry demands and threats of revenge and all the usual posturing that came before a war, but humanity did something far more terrifying. They went silent. Human ambassadors across the galaxy simply packed their belongings and left. Without a word, no warnings, no explanations, no final statements. Human merchants closed their shops and departed. Human travelers vanished from space stations and alien worlds within 2 weeks. There was not a single human being left outside of human-controlled space. The silence was absolute and total and deeply unsettling to species who had never taken humanity seriously before at first. The Galactic Concord assumed this was some kind of dramatic protest, a childish tantrum that would end when the humans calmed down. But as days turned to weeks and the silence continued, something like worry began to spread through the great halls of power. The Dasari were the first to sound the alarm. They were among the oldest species in the galaxy, ancient beings of pure thought who had spent millions of years collecting memories and knowledge from every corner of existence. When they announced that they had something important to share with the Concord, every species paid attention. Elder Vashix of the Dasari floated before the assembled representatives like a cloud of shimmering light. And when they spoke, their voice carried the weight of ages. We have searched our memory vaults, Vashix said, and we have found complete records of Earth's history, records that we collected when humans first joined the Concord, and then forgot because we thought them unimportant. The chamber fell silent as Vashix began projecting images into the air, images from human history that made even the most hardened alien warriors uncomfortable. Wars that killed millions, weapons that could erase cities in an instant, genocides and horrors that seemed almost impossible to believe. The humans are not what we assume them to be, Vashix continued. They are not a peaceful species by nature. They are a species of apex predators who conquered their world through violence and nearly destroyed themselves 12 times with their own weapons. The images shifted to show humanity's recovery from each disaster, their ability to rebuild and come back stronger every single time. They chose peace when they joined the Concord because they hoped the galaxy would be different. They chose patience because they believed that civilization could offer them something better than endless war. We spent 200 years teaching them that. They were wrong. Vashix paused, and when they spoke again, their voice was heavy with something that sounded almost like fear. We invited a species of apex predators to the galactic table and spent 2 centuries teaching them they had no place there. We mocked their kindness and exploited their patience and murdered their children while they begged for justice. We created the conditions for what comes next, and I fear we will not survive what we have created. The warning came too late while the Dasari were speaking. The Veluxi Dominion was already mobilizing for revenge, the new High Brood Mother, a creature even crueler than Xyrix had been, assembled the largest war fleet in Veluxi history, 10,000 warships carrying millions of warriors. Enough firepower to crack planets and burn entire systems. The humans have hidden in their little corner of space like the cowards they are, she declared. We will drag them out and show them the true meaning of pain. We will make them regret ever being born. Her fleet launched toward human space with the confidence of a predator who had never known defeat. They expected to find terrified humans cowering behind weak defenses. What they found instead was the human First Fleet waiting for them at the edge of Veluxi territory. At first, the Veluxi were amused. Only 200 human ships faced their armada of 10,000, a ratio so absurd that some Veluxi commanders actually laughed when they saw it. This is their great response? The High Brood Mother mocked. 200 ships against our glory? Destroy them and be done with it. The Veluxi fleet surged forward, eager for easy victory, and then the human carriers opened their launch bays. Each of the 200 human ships was enormous, not warships in the traditional sense, but mobile deployment platforms carrying something the galaxy had never imagined. 500 autonomous war drones per carrier, 100,000 combat units deploying in perfect unison, moving with speed and precision that no living pilot could match. The drones were not just fast, they were smart. Controlled by artificial intelligences that humans had spent centuries perfecting in secret. They moved like a single organism with 100,000 bodies, flowing around Veluxi defenses and striking weak points with surgical accuracy. First wave of Veluxi ships exploded before they could even fire their weapons. The second wave lasted slightly longer, almost 30 seconds. By the time the High Brood Mother realized what was happening, her glorious fleet was dying around her in fire and silence. The Battle of Veluxi Reach lasted exactly 11 minutes when it was over. 8,400 Veluxi warships were nothing but expanding clouds of debris. The remaining ships fled in absolute terror, broadcasting warnings to anyone who would listen, but the warnings were unnecessary. Every species in the galaxy had been watching. They had seen the impossible happen, a minor species with 200 ships destroying the mightiest fleet the Veluxi had ever assembled, and they had seen something even more terrifying in the way the humans fought. There was no anger in their attacks, no passion or fury or desire for revenge. There was only cold, calculated, perfect efficiencies. The humans did not fight like a species seeking vengeance. They fought like a species that had been planning this moment for a very long time across the galaxy. Alien leaders began frantically searching their records for anything they might have said or done to offend humanity over the past 200 years. They found quite a lot. Secret communications flew between species, discussing whether it was possible to apologize, to make amends, to somehow convince the humans that they had always been friends. But deep down, every species knew the truth. They had laughed while human children will work too. Death in slave camps. They had mocked human ambassadors who came seeking justice. They had bet on how quickly the humans would surrender while New Helsinki burned. And now, for the first time in galactic history, The minor species were no longer minor. The humans had hidden their true strength for 2 centuries, waiting and watching and building in secret, hoping they would never need to reveal what they had become. That hope was dead now, and so was any chance of mercy. The sleeping giant was fully awake, and its eyes were fixed on every species that had ever made the mistake of treating humanity like prey. The hunt was about to begin. The Human-Veluxy War lasted exactly 1 month, and in that time, the galaxy learned the true meaning of Terra. Admiral James Okafor commanded the human navy with a style of warfare that no species had ever witnessed before. There were no grand announcements before attacks. There were no warnings or demands or opportunities to surrender. Human fleets simply appeared from nowhere, destroyed every military asset in the system, and vanished before anyone could respond. The Veluxy had no idea where to defend because the humans struck everywhere at once. Military bases that had stood for thousands of years were reduced to rubble, in minute shipyards that produced the greatest warships in the galaxy were turned into fields of molten metal. Communication stations that connected the Veluxy Empire were systematically eliminated until the Dominion could barely coordinate its own forces, and through it all, the humans never touched a single civilian target. Not one city was bombed, not one population center was attacked, not one innocent Veluxy was harmed by human weapons. This was not mercy. It was a message. The humans were showing the galaxy that they could have destroyed everything if they wanted to, that they were choosing to limit their destruction, that their restraint was a gift they could withdraw at any moment. The Veluxy High Command broke after 3 weeks. They sent desperate messages begging for peace, offering anything the humans wanted if they would just stop. The human response was a single ship carrying a single diplomat, Lieutenant David Muller, whose wife and children had died on New Helsinki. Muller met with the Veluxy leadership in what remained of their command center, surrounded by the wreckage of their once mighty empire, placed a document on the table, and spoke in a voice that carried no emotion at all. "These are our terms," he said. "They are not negotiable. You will accept them, or you will cease to exist as a species." The terms were absolute, complete, and total disarmament of all Veluxy military forces, the return of every human prisoner still alive in Veluxy space, the return of every human body for proper burial, reparations paid to humanity over the next 500 years, and finally, the Veluxy homeworld would be placed under permanent human observation, not occupation, but observation, to ensure they never threatened anyone again. The Veluxy leaders stared at the document in disbelief. "This is outrageous," one of them protested. "The Galactic Concord will never allow such terms. This violates every principle of the Galactic Concord." Lieutenant Muller interrupted. "Watched your forces murder 4 million of my people, while they placed bets on how quickly we would surrender. The Galactic Concord has no standing in this matter." Before the Veluxy could respond, the Concord made its own move. Several of the most powerful species in the galaxy had been watching the war with growing horror, and they had decided that humanity needed to be stopped before it grew too powerful to control. They announced a peacekeeping intervention and assembled a coalition fleet of their own 5,000 ships from a dozen species, demanding that humanity accept a negotiated settlement. Admiral Okafor received their ultimatum while his fleet was still mopping up the last Veluxy military installations. He read it once, then ordered his communications officer to open a channel to the Galactic Concord. Every species in the galaxy watched as the human admiral appeared on their screens. He was not a large man, but something about the way he held himself made even the mightiest alien warriors feel small. "I have received your ultimatum," he said in a voice as calm as still water, "and I wish to respond personally." He paused, and in that pause, The galaxy held its breath. For 200 years, we came to you with open hands. You laughed and called us weak. His eyes, dark and deep and utterly without warmth, swept across the assembled representatives. We came to you with reason and evidence and hope for justice. You ignored us and told us to accept our place at the bottom of your precious hierarchy. The coalition fleet commanders shifted nervously in their seats. We came to you with evidence of atrocities. 12,000 humans worked to death in a single camp. Children torn from their parents. Families destroyed for profit. You looked away because we were not important enough to care about. His voice never rose, never showed any sign of anger, and that somehow made every word more terrifying. Now we come to you with warships, and suddenly you wish to discuss fairness. Suddenly, you speak of negotiated settlements and proportional responses and civilized behavior. He leaned forward slightly, and even through the screen, his presence seemed to fill every room in the galaxy. The Veluxi killed 4 million of our people, while you watched and wagered on our extinction. Our terms for them are not excessive, they are merciful. And mercy is the last human trait any of you will ever see from us. The coalition fleet commanders exchanged worried glances. You have assembled 5,000 ships to threaten us, Okafor continued. Allow me to show you what that threat means to humanity. The screens flickered, and suddenly the coalition commanders were looking at their own ships from the outside. Human vessels had surrounded them completely without anyone noticing. Not attack ship censorships. Targeting ships? Ships designed to disable enemy systems with surgical precision. Your weapons are offline, Okafor said. Your engines are locked. Your shields are compromised. If I gave the order, every single ship in your coalition would be dead in approximately 90 seconds. The coalition commanders scrambled to check their systems and found that the human admiral was telling the truth. But I'm not going to give that order, Okafor said, because unlike you, humanity does not slaughter those who cannot fight back. Your ships will be released. You will return to your worlds, and you will tell everyone you meet what you learned here today. He leaned back, and something that might have been contempt flickered across his face. We are not your enemies. We never wanted to be anyone's enemy. All we ever wanted was a seat at the table and the chance to live in peace. You decided we were not worthy of that, so we built our own table, and the galaxy will never threaten us again. The coalition fleet was released, just as Okafor promised, but no one missed the message hidden inside his mercy. Humanity had disabled 5,000 warships from a dozen species without firing a single shot. They had shown that they could destroy the coalition at any moment, and had chosen not to, not because they could not, but because they wanted everyone to know that their restraint was a choice, a gift that could be withdrawn in an instant. 3 days later, the Veluxi Empress signed the surrender documents aboard the HSS New Helsinki, a massive warship that had been designed, built, and launched in only 19 days. She signed in the same room where her people's crimes were displayed on every wall. Photos of the dead from New Helsinki, names of the children who had died in Veluxi labor camps, as a memorial to Commander Yuki Tanaka, whose sacrifice had started everything. The war was over, but for the galaxy, the reckoning was just beginning, because every species that had ever wronged humanity was now asking themselves the same terrifying question. If this is what the humans did to the Veluxi, what will they do to us? The answer, they would soon learn, was far more complicated and far more frightening than simple revenge. 10 years had passed since the end of the human-Veluxi war, and the galaxy was a very different place. Humanity had not conquered anyone. They had not expanded their territory through force. They had not taken revenge on the species that had mocked and ignored them for 2 centuries. Instead, They had done something far more powerful. They had simply watched, and everyone knew they were watching. The human doctrine, as it came to be called, was simple and absolute. Any species could live as they chose, follow their own customs, build their own empires. But any species that preyed upon the weak, that enslaved the helpless, that murdered the innocent, that species would answer to Earth, not to the Galactic Concord, which had proven itself worthless, not to ancient treaties and diplomatic agreements that protected the powerful at the expense of everyone else, to Earth, and to the human fleets that patrolled the galaxy like silent guardians at first. The great powers of the Concord resented this new reality they called humanity, arrogant and dangerous and a threat to galactic stability. But the minor species, the small civilizations that had spent millennia being bullied and exploited and ignored, saw something else entirely. They saw a protector. One by one, these lesser species began reaching out to humanity, asking for friendship and alliance and the simple promise that they would never again be alone against the darkness. The Terran Compact was born from these requests, not an empire built on conquest, but a coalition built on a single sacred promise. Any species that joined would be protected. Any species that was threatened would be defended. Any species that had been wronged would find justice within 5 years. Over 200 species had joined the compact within 10 years. It had become the most powerful alliance in galactic history, not because of human weapons, but because of something far more valuable: trust. The species of the Terran Compact trusted humanity because humans had proven something that no other great power had ever proven. They had the strength to destroy their enemies utterly and had chosen mercy instead. They had the power to take revenge on everyone who had wronged them and had chosen restraint instead. They had the ability to rule the galaxy through fear and had chosen protection instead. This made humanity different from every empire that had come before. This made them worthy of trust. Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to the Galactic Concord Summit for the first time in a decade on a warm spring morning when the stars seemed to shine brighter than usual. She was older now, her hair gray and her face lined with the weight of all she had witnessed, but her spine was still straight and her eyes still sharp as she walked into the great chamber where she had once been mocked and dismissed. The chamber fell absolutely silent when she entered. Representatives from thousands of species watched as she made her way to the speaking platform, but she did not walk alone. Behind her came ambassadors from 200 species, each one representing a member of the Terran Compact, each one walking with the quiet confidence of people who knew they would never be bullied again. Elena stood at the platform and looked out at the assembly that had once treated her like a joke. She saw fear in many eyes, she saw respect in others, and in a few, she saw something that might have been shame. 10 years ago, she began, her voice carrying easily through the silent chamber. I stood in this room, asked for simple things: a seat at the table, respect for my people, justice for our dead. She paused, letting the memories hang in the air. You laughed at me. You told me that humanity was too weak and too young and too unimportant to deserve consideration. You watched as our children were worked to death in labor camps, and you placed bets on how quickly we would surrender when our worlds burned. No one spoke, no one moved, no one dared to breathe too loudly. We could have destroyed you for that. Elena continued. We had the power, we had the right after everything you did to us. No one would have blamed us for burning this galaxy to ash. She smiled. And it was not a cruel smile or a triumphant smile. It was the sad smile of someone who had seen too much to feel any satisfaction in victory. But destruction was never what we wanted. All we ever wanted was what we asked for in the beginning: a chance to live in peace, a place where our children could grow without fear a galaxy that judged us by our actions rather than our age. She gestured to the representative standing behind her. You decided. We were not worthy of that, so we built our own table, and now we are no longer asking for a seat at yours. The representatives of the Terran Compact stepped forward to stand beside her 200 species, standing together as equals, united not by conquest but by choice. The Terran Compact does not seek to rule the galaxy, Elena said. We do not demand tribute or submission or worship. We only demand one thing: that the strong stop preying on the weak, that the powerful stop exploiting the helpless, that this galaxy finally become the civilization it always pretended to be. She leaned forward, and her eyes swept across every representative in the chamber. Any species that cannot accept that simple standard should be very, very careful in the years to come, because we are watching, we are always watching, and we never forget. She turned and walked out of the chamber without waiting for a response. The representatives of the Terran Compact followed her, and the old powers of the galaxy sat in silence, understanding at last what they had created through 2 centuries of cruelty and neglect. 1,000 years later, a Thazari historian named Velos taught young minds about the event known as the Terran Emergence. The students gathered from 100 different species listened with fascination as Velos described how a minor species had transformed the entire galaxy. The humans were not stronger than us, Velos explained. They were not smarter or more advanced or more numerous. What made them different was something far more dangerous. A young student raised a tentacle. What was it? Memory, Velos said. The humans remembered every insult, every injustice, every act of cruelty. They remembered. And they waited, and when they finally moved, nothing could stand against them. Velos projected an image into the air. Statue that stood on the rebuilt colony of New Helsinki showed a human woman with her hand raised. Not in victory or celebration, but in mourning. The inscription at the base read simply, "We were kind, we were patient, then we were done." The lesson of the Terran Emergence is simple, Velos concluded. Never mistake patience for weakness, never mistake mercy for submission, and never, ever assume that kindness means you can do whatever you want without consequences. The students nodded, understanding the weight of those words. Most importantly, Velos added, never forget that the humans remember everything. What you do to others will come back to you eventually. It may take years, it may take centuries, but it will come back. The lesson ended, and the students filed out into a galaxy that had learned at terrible cost to treat all species with respect. And somewhere in the stars, humanity continued watching always, remembering, always ready to remind the galaxy what happened when the limit of human patience was finally crossed.